The Roman Empire is an absolute juggernaut in the world of total war. The sheer power that they bring to the table makes them one of the most oppressive forces in all of human history. So let's take a look at how their army ticks. We'll start off with the formation that Rome brings to the table. Their basic infantry units will use a deep column formation, which is very effective against cavalry charges. See, being part of a legion means your life is pretty cheap. First you have the This is Rome's skirmisher unit, and they're armed with a javelin and a dagger. So on paper is not how Rome likes to do things. To answer that question, I sent my writer Greg to Rome to interview the citizens of Rome to find out who they consider their greatest enemy. I hope you learned something new, and I'll see you next time. I mean, the city is called Roma, so it shouldn't be too hard to find somebody from Rome, right? Well, after months of searching, he finally found a guy named Romulus. Turns out he's the last official emperor of the Western Roman Empire, but he was only 2 years old when he took the throne, and he was deposed less than a year later. I mean, the guy literally had a puppet ruler. He wasn't even allowed to eat spaghetti. Anyways, according to Romulus, Rome's greatest enemy is Italy itself. Now, I thought he was joking at first, but turns out he's dead serious. The Italian peninsula has been sacked by Goths, Vandals, Byzantines, Franks, Spanish, Portuguese, you name it. And during medieval times, Italy was split up into dozens of independent Italian states. So apparently there were plenty of enemies to go around. For example, you might notice that the Triarii have a low armor penetration stat. This would be bad news for Rome if they didn't have such strong allies. But because the Principes and Velites weaken the enemy so much, this low armor stat isn't much of a problem. Another thing you might notice is that the Triarii have a low movement stat. Again, this would be a problem if Rome wasn't playing the waiting game, by forming a shield wall and waiting for the enemy to get within sword range. The Triarii can make full use of their superior durability and melee stats. So even though the Triarii might not look like a scary unit, don't let that fool you. These guys are terrifying once they get up close and personal. When fighting light infantry, these guys will usually kill the enemy before they ever get into melee range. Against heavier infantry, the Velites will still harass the enemy and soften them up, but they won't be able to kill the enemy outright. That's why Rome supports them with their next type of auxiliary troop, the Principes. The Principes are a lightly armored infantry unit, armed with a gladius and a shield. They don't have any javelins, but they do have some pretty good missile troops supporting them, so they don't really need them. The Principes will finish off the enemy that the Velites started weakening, and they'll also help protect the much more expensive legionaries from missile attacks. Once they get up close and personal though, they're not really built for prolonged fights. Sure, they're more durable than the Velites, because they have armor, but if the enemy is tough enough to survive missile fire from the Velites and Principes, then they probably have some decent armor themselves, in which case these lightly armored infantrymen aren't gonna last too long. That's where the Triarii come in. The Triarii are Rome's heavy infantry, and they form the backbone of the Roman army. They have the exact same weapons as the Principes, but they have better armor, which allows them to tank quite a few hits. So they'll clean up whatever the Principes couldn't deal with and hold the line until reinforcements arrive. So when you're refighting alongside 5,000 other men that have exactly the same equipment and tactics as you do, losing 1 or 2 men here or there doesn't matter. In fact, it's kind of expected. But what Rome needs to keep intact is their shield wall. Because as long as the shield wall remains intact, they can steamroll through anything. As long as you have enough manpower, the legionary is a master of defense, but he's not really built for offense. He only has that one sword and no javelin or bow, so you need to get up close and personal to make use of those weapons. Because of this, Rome's tactics revolve around closing the distance between themselves and their enemy, and then unleashing the full force of their legion. It also looks pretty cool. Their auxiliary skirmishers will deploy into a loose formation so they can fire at multiple targets without getting too bunched up, and their cavalry is also deployed in a fairly loose formation. This gives them good shock value when used correctly, but it does make them somewhat vulnerable to missiles. You could argue that this is really a weakness, since Roman cavalry rarely gets within range of enemy missile troops, but more on that later. Speaking of cavalry, Rome doesn't have any unique cavalry. They do get access to some very powerful cavalry units like the Cat, which are super strong and durable, but these are nothing we haven't seen before from other factions. Rome's main strength is definitely their infantry. These guys are just beasts in melee. Their heavy infantry is armed with a gladius, a short sword designed for stabbing rather than slashing. This means that it has a very quick attack speed, allowing the legionary to tire out his enemy while minimizing the chances of taking damage. This is further improved by the fact that the shield wall is angled to bounce off incoming blows, making these guys even more durable. Now, it might seem counterintuitive, but Rome actually wants their soldiers to take damage. In order to facilitate this, they have a bunch of auxiliary troops that distract the enemy, soften them up and protect the vulnerable cataphract. Now on paper, the Triarii might look like a pretty average infantry unit, but remember, Rome has some pretty insane auxiliary troops. So now you know how Rome forms their army and you know about their infantry. But there's still one question left. Who is Rome's strongest enemy? So now you know everything about the Roman Empire. Thanks for watching.